in talking to my mom, talking to my dad, and the people before, he was such a pleasant little person to be around. He was really small in structure and had nothing but kind words for everybody, every single person. And I always think about that, and I think, how can foreigners come to a strange country, not know anybody, not know the language, and yet you're able to convert them to your religion? How can they do that? So that has to be a miracle in itself if you stop to think about that. It's not something that you can just snap your fingers and it's going to happen, because people don't work that way.
What converts people is your life, the way you are, what you do, more than what you say. Words are nice. Some people have gifts for eloquence, but Saint Herman, and he did have a little gift for that too. He had a fiery spirit, and he would put in his word, and he could speak well. And everything that he said had power because he was fulfilling it in action, the way he lived his life. And absolutely without pretension and without really probably being aware too much what he was doing.
A native of the Varanaj region, from rather poor peasant stock, but of a family of sufficient means, he was increasingly drawn inwardly towards seclusion and absolute detachment from people. He had first made 2 attempts to flee, but he was subsequently returned to the monastery.
In the village, recruits were selected by lot, but he was literate, and he became an assistant company scribe.
Having persuaded 3 brothers to go with him, he left again, this time with permission to found a new monastery on the island of Alam in Lake Ladoga. Until he finally decided to go to America, answering the first call for aspirants.
Our land is known to you as America. The main island is Kodiak, upon which there is a company harbor and a church. A little house was given to us by the company as soon as we arrived. Father Macarius and Father Juvenal are always aflame with zeal and anxious to go off in all directions to preach. And if the company people would only stop offending the Americans, then life here would really be quite pleasant.
The Shelikov and Golikov company men threaten other people in a most barbarous way. They take their wives and daughters as mistresses by force. They kill the people. They send out the men to hunt sea otters from the earliest spring. Healthy or ailing, it does not matter. Some of those who are ill die en route. And they keep the men hunting until fall, and there is no time to put up food for themselves and their families, nor get materials for clothing. They starve to death and suffer from cold because they lack clothing. If an Aleut does not bring in plenty of fox pelts, they strip him and pin him to the ground and beat him with sinew cords. When they are subjected to severe floggings, they commit suicide.
The governor here is Baranov, a man rich and proud at that. He lives extravagantly and makes no effort towards any improvements here.
We have a hermit here now by the name of Herman, who is worse than Macari. He is a great talker and likes to write, even though he keeps himself in his cell most of the time, not even going to church out of fear of worldly temptations. He knows, nevertheless, everything that we think and do, not only at daytime, but even at night. I was punished by anxiety, and my temper was sorely tried because the clergy and government employees were entirely out of bounds. They promised the islanders independence and freedom to live according to their old customs if they would take the oath of allegiance. Their freedom consists in robbery and in everlasting bloody barbarism.
Monk Herman asked Baranov to make known in decent language, devoid of obscenities, the reason for his displeasure. The manager just continued to shout, "You found some kind of an oath of allegiance. You have corrupted all the Americans." To this, the humble elder responded, "The Imperial Manifesto was published for all. If the spiritual mission in any way acted illegally, shouldn't the matter then be submitted to the government, where everything can be examined in accordance with the law?"
In the first year of our arrival, Father Macarius and Father Juvenal went out on a mission. Macarius to the Aleutian Islands, from whence he went to Russia, and Juvenal to the eastern shore of the mainland. Going further north, he crossed to Alaska, and there was killed by some people, though the hearsay is not consistent as to what manner and by precisely which people. After this, our Father Iosif was summoned to Russia in order to be made a bishop. He was returning in the company of Hieromonk Macarius, and they were already close to Kodiak, judging from the pieces of the ship washed up. The ship was wrecked in an unknown place, and now only 3 of us remain alive, thanking Almighty God.
Orthodoxy in Alaska rests on Father Herman, because the mission disintegrated through, if you will, through God's act. The newly consecrated Bishop of the Aleutians and Alaska and his entourage, including a choir and faculty that he was bringing to open a seminary here in Kodiak, went down with the ship Phoenix with all hands.
I entrust to his care the leadership of the local spiritual mission. Their intention is to remove themselves from this turbulent situation and to lead a quiet life apart.
I am located some 10 versts from the harbor, on a separate little island which is named New Valam. Close to me there is quite a little river, in which, during the summertime, there is plenty of fish. I live alone. Only 2 versts from me live 3 families of Americans. They, with great love, help me in my needs.
After Father Herman settled on Spruce Island, there was a tidal wave. Having taken up an icon of the Mother of God from its place and placing the icon at the spot to which the water had risen the last time, he informed those present that they should not be afraid, saying that above and beyond this spot, where the holy object had been placed, the sea would not go.
Once the forest on Spruce Island caught on fire. The elder made a clearing in the forest thickets about a yard wide to the foot of the hill, upturning the moss, and said, "Be at peace, the fire will not cross this line." When there was no hope for salvation, the fire with great force came up to the moss upturned by the elder. It ran along it and stopped, not touching the forest on the other side of the line.
Just after last Passa, a young woman of no more than 20 came to me and heard about how the Son of God was made flesh, and she would not leave me, but she pleaded with me with great conviction against my inclination and my love of solitude to accept her.
I think that there was a pattern that Father Herman, realizing the amount of wife-beating that was going on, not only among the mixed families, but also among the native families. Women were not treated like queens, contrary to modern political correctness. And he gave shelter. I consider her the first woman native educator in the history of Alaska.
The woman, whose name was Sophia, learned how to read and write Russian in 1 year and came to speak Russian well. Soon, several orphan girls of Aleut and Creole extraction joined Sophia. In 1831, I observed their agricultural work in a blossoming state. The orphan girls, healthy and apparently joyful, showed that they were happy with their lives. Seeing this, I ordered the government office to subsidize Herman, and his place was called New Valam.
the former chief managers of the colony, several times rode out to Spruce Island in bidarkas at night so as not to be noticed by people, and then kept watch on what Father Herman was doing. I must confess that I myself heard such slanderous tales about Father Herman that I had begun to write back to St. Petersburg about him even before I had met him. Father Herman immediately came to see me. He explained local conditions to me, how poor the Aleuts were, and he asked me to protect them.
When you left Kodiak, either through God's wrath or his holy workings for our good, the epidemic continued for a while. It caused the death of many of the young women and left their children orphans.
We have returned from a 200-mile trip to the islands and to the coasts of our colonies. One of the most pleasant memories which we brought back from this trip was that of Father Herman. He had a clear voice full of liveliness, which was the reflection of the nimbleness of a refined mind. His movements were energetic, as a man of 30 years old. He had a sense of humor, and it was difficult to understand how he could have retained so much elasticity and interest in everything after having lived 40 years in solitude.
I asked the father why he was seeking his salvation in this melancholy solitude, and why he had voluntarily separated himself from his fellow citizens, whom he was supposed to be converting.
You think that I am supposed to possess the truth, and my seeming idleness displeases you. But do you know what the truth is and where you can find it?
This discussion displeased me, and I gave the bold monk to understand that we could make better use of our time.
My diocese is not very large, only a few hundred people. If only we could have a chapel and a bell.
This wish I could fulfill. A few months later, a ship brought the necessary boards and beams, and with the strong help of the Aleuts, the chapel was built.
See, there is a very close bond between Fyodor Petrovich Wrangel and Father Herman. Wrangel met Saint Herman when he was a very young man, and he never lost his respect and love for Saint Herman.
The local inhabitants used to go to the elder. They approached the chapel and they heard superb choral singing, a multitude of voices singing. They wondered where the people had come from. They opened the door into the little chapel, and there Father Herman stood alone, reading, chanting half aloud. Father Herman used to feed birds with dried fish, and they in great number would nest near his cell. Father Herman was also seen feeding the bears. Under his cell there lived ermines. This little animal, after giving birth to its litter, is unapproachable, yet the elder would feed them with his own hands. With the death of the elder, both the birds and the beasts disappeared. Even the garden would not give forth crop if someone were to care for it willingly.
30 years will pass after my death. All those who live now on Spruce Island will be dead. You alone will remain alive, and you will be old and poor. And then they will remember me. When I die, kill the bull, because his labors for me are already done.
When the villagers had come to Spruce Island, they had presented the elder with a young calf, and the elder had raised and nurtured it. When the old man died, the others were unwilling to kill this bull. The next day, the animal ran headfirst into a tree and died. The elder said,
When I die, do not tell them at the port, but bury me yourselves.
After a short while, he lowered his head unto Gerasim's chest. His face suddenly began to shine, and the cell was filled with a divine fragrance. And they all knew that the elder was dead. His pupil did not dare not inform the authorities at the port of the elder's death, because everyone loved him. In answer to his news, he received instructions not to proceed with the burial, but to wait until a priest came and brought a coffin. As soon as the coffin had been made, the weather worsened, and a fierce wind blew so that it was not possible for the priest to set out, and the elder's body was left lying for 12 days. Gerasim and the other pupils resolved to bury the elder, and they had no sooner placed the body in the earth when the weather became calm and clear. At this point, the priest arrived with a fine coffin, but he decided not to exhume the body, as it obviously pleased both God and the elder to have it buried as it was.
my former student, he told me that for a long time he thought that Father Herman was alive, and that you just called in Father Herman and he would come.
People from all over come here and to take the holy water. And this is a normal part. The people come over in the skiffs from the village of Ouzinki. Even though they kept the traditions perhaps more closely in the past, people still come over here and everything is sacred here to them. And they take this holy water home, and it's a regular part of their lives. And we've seen many miracles have been recorded by people coming here.
We had an old man caretaking over there at Monk's Lagoon. The Relics were already in Kodiak. And he was not starving, but he was really hungry, never had any food for a long time, for whatever reasons. And he prayed to Father Herman. He told me he went down the beach and there was a big silver salmon in a pool, in a shallow pool. He went and got that fish and he had a really good dinner. My brother was affected by Father Herman because he had really horrible eyesight. His eyes were failing. My mother took him to Monk's Lagoon and she got the dirt from the grave and put it on his eyes, and the next thing you know, he never had a bit of trouble for the rest of his life.
Yeah, your mom used to say you had fell and cut yourself and it got infected, and no matter what she tried to do, it would not heal. And that's when they took you to Monk's Lagoon and they put dirt from Father Herman's grave on that sore and washed it off with his water. From there it healed.
When the war began in the year 1940, they was going to harm Kodiak because the base was very full at that time. It was just full of people. There was guards all over, all different kinds, sailors, Marines, and so forth, 5 different tribes. They were all ready. But Boise did not want him here. Saint Herman did not want him here. He closed Kodiak Island. They couldn't find Kodiak Island because it was thick with fog. That's when they bombed Pearl Harbor down there.
Today, people address prayers to Saint Herman. Before that, people appealed to him, but they also said, "We pray for you."
Kodiak, or the diocese, had no interest in Monk's Lagoon at all, or Father Herman, until they decided they were going to canonize him. Yeah. Then they came out of all the woodwork.
It became necessary then to get the relics to Kodiak because they decided to do it in Kodiak.
They didn't tell us. Nobody knew. There wasn't a soul in Ouzinki that knew they were moving Father Herman's relics. Nobody.
And the thing got desperate as there was another group that wanted to also get those relics.
You don't yourself believe in what you're doing.
That the relics would have been stolen from this holy place and taken away.
If they're going to be stolen, anybody can go into the church in Kodiak. I mean, they've broken into the church before.
So they asked me that I would go get them, and I said, well, the weather's bad. If I can't get them, no one else can go over there and get them either.
When we can't go over there, that's the sign that there's something wrong, that he don't want nobody over there.
So the only thing I suggest that we could do, we have a Kodiak Airways, they do have a helicopter.
There were pieces of ice up on the beach where normally I would land, next to the trail that goes up through the trees to Monk's Lagoon. So we looked for an alternative landing site, and we found a small frozen pond surrounded by trees, which was very close to the chapel. And I hovered down through the trees, landed, shut it down. We stepped out into the cold wind and walked to the chapel. And that's where we retrieved Monk Herman's relics and brought them back to the helicopter.
John Osgood did a really dirty thing when he flew that helicopter to Monk's Lagoon and helped Father Turgonsky move those relics.
I invoke God's blessings upon John L. Osgood in grateful recognition of his assistance to the Orthodox Church in America as pilot of the helicopter that transferred the relics of Saint Herman of Alaska from Spruce Island to Kodiak on March 26, 1969.
Saint Herman never wanted to be in Kodiak. He wanted to be here. This is where he lived his life. And God willing, someday that monastic life is here and flourishing. This is where Saint Herman needs to be returned, to this holy place.
On this place, there will be a monastery in time.
One of the things that's going to happen one day is there's going to be a monastery built in Spruce Island. And the relics of Saint Herman have to go back to Spruce Island. That's where they belong. It's nice to have them here. It's nice to have them protected here. It's nice to have them taken care of here. We agree with that. But we agree they got to go back to Spruce Island, where they belong. And that's the whole parish. In fact, that's the whole island. And by all means, Ouzinki's going to tell you that in a more forceful way than me.
They made him a saint. Well, big deal. He's always been a saint to us. Always, and always will be.
We believe that there are saints who are known only to God, regardless of what faiths they belong to.
Christus, Amen.